Welcome to the Draw Shop's Get Genius podcast, where we talk to today's business influencers to pick their brain and pull out their genius. It's time to get genius.
Hey guys, welcome to another Get Genius episode. Today we're going to talk about lawyering. We're going to talk about law and internet law and all the things that you might not be thinking about, especially if you have an internet business. And we're talking to Richard Chapo. He's been a lawyer for over 24 years, worked with some extremely well-known people, and he's quite well-known as an internet business attorney in Southern California. His philosophy is to proactively position his clients to minimize their potential exposure to lawsuits, which you might not be thinking about it, but can be quite risky and great if you are in the internet business. There's so many laws and they're changing all the time. And there's so many things that we do that we think is okay. If you're a blogger, if you promote a bunch of stuff online, if you have a website that's talking about other products. I mean, there's so many different things to look out for. So we talk about this in the interview and kind of some of the things that I'm curious about. And there's so many different businesses that you might not think about that are at risk. And it's a good way to take a look at yourself and your internet presence. So what he does basically is provide advice to his clients as large as multinational corporations and as small as hobby bloggers, mom bloggers. And, his goal is to eliminate potential problems before a lawsuit is filed. So his goal is to get you protected before that happens. And if it does happen, well, then he can help you out with that too. He's amazing. He's versed in a variety of internet laws, including the DMCA, Communications Decency Act, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, as well as FTC compliance guidelines, state privacy mandates, recurring billing laws, all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure in some of those things that I mentioned, you might be going, oh, we do that. We have to worry about that in our business. So hopefully you'll get some insight to that. And of course, if you have more questions, he does free consultations. So we have all of his information in our blog post show notes, and he'll talk about it on the interview as well. Super cool guy. I feel really stoked to get to speak with him, and you'll find out some of the cool people he's worked with during the interview. Enjoy. Hello, Richard, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Well, I think we're gonna talk about some good, important stuff today. all about internet law. Possibly, I would love to talk about some startup strategies and some, answer some questions that I think some of our listeners might be having in terms of joint ventures, starting up businesses, how to protect themselves, and you're the guy. So thank you for letting me pick your brain and get it all out.
Sure. No, it's my pleasure. It's obviously we have a very entrepreneurial country, and in fact the world. So it's certainly a lot of questions people have. And a little bit of planning up front goes a long way, to preventing problems down the line. So
yeah,
definitely
absolutely.
Worth talking about.
And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they don't realize that they needed a plan until after something happens. So I'd like to talk about how to get people, prepared. Not necessarily that something's going to go wrong, but in the event that something does, that they're protected. But before I jump into that, can you kind of give us a brief background of your experience and why this became your thing to do and why you love doing it?
Sure. I was born in Oklahoma, of all places. Ended up moving to California early on. Thank goodness. And was raised in California. This was definite upbringing, but raised in California and went to law school here and became an attorney in 1992. So I'm getting up there in years, but originally worked with a litigation firm that focused primarily on complex litigation, complex contractual issues, those kinds of things. Burned out in 1999 and went to the logical place that everybody would go when they burn out, which was Siberia for a year.
Yeah.
And I taught in Siberia and then came back and had a friend who had become a CEO of one of those initial internet companies that were popping up right around then as the internet started to kind of evolve into a commercial medium. And most of the law in the area was completely unsettled. And so I started helping them out, and it became an interest to me. And I've been working in it ever since then. Work with small businesses, everybody from, individual bloggers up to, dating sites and multinational publishing companies. And it's just, kind of been interesting to watch little tiny businesses with unique ideas that would never work in the brick and mortar world, blossom on the internet.
Yeah.
And, become successful, powerful people.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. And you get to see, so many, a variety of businesses all online. So that's awesome. What would you say, though, kind of sets you apart from other attorneys that are doing something similar to what you're doing?
Probably two things. One, I've owned my own internet businesses as well as brick and mortar businesses. So I have kind of an understanding of some of the things, that people who are starting up businesses tend to face and some of the questions they have. And then when I left complex litigation, because I was burned out, I really rethought how I would approach things. So I tried to be very client friendly. Most of my clients, would say I don't act like an attorney. I don't talk down to clients or anything of that sort. And I try to come up with flat fee billing situations for clients so they know exactly what it's going to cost and they don't, have to worry about all of those things. So I'm very informal. I probably get criticized by their attorneys for not being professional enough, but I'm not a wingtip, three-piece suit wearing individual. That's just not my thing anymore. So I really try to focus with my clients on being proactive. The goal isn't to win a lawsuit if it's filed. The goal is really to try to avoid ever getting sued or ever running, into violations with government requirements and what have you. And, early on, it was a fairly simple process, getting more complex by the day as governments try to reclaim their territory online. But that's the general approach, a little bit different than what other attorneys do.
Yeah, and it seems like, there's so many things that you have to look out for because there's so much changes all the time with businesses online and just everything with being online. It seems like the laws are changing a lot too. So you have to be like pretty current all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the problems that we're seeing now is, we always think of it as the World Wide Web. And we're really sort of evolving to a scenario where it's not going to be worldwide anymore. It's going to be divided into economic areas or into just, areas based on borders. So, for instance, the EU is issuing a new privacy regulation that will go into force in May 2018. And it's what's called an opt-in regulation. And what that means is before you obtain any privacy information from anybody, any kind of personal information, including just their IP address, you have to get consent from them. So if you go to a website, something will pop up and it will say, here's all these things that we do with your information. We want to collect your information. And then the person who's visiting has to check a box agreeing to that, or you cannot collect their information. There's some exceptions to that, but it's that type of a business model. Now, if you move to the U.S., of course, and you think of Facebook and Google, their whole business model is based on, consuming as much personal information as they can and then monetizing it, and that's the whole model. And the U.S. is what's called an opt-out jurisdiction. So they can do that legally unless you really, go through a number of steps to make it clear that you don't want that done. So then the question for businesses is, well, how do they comply with both areas? And, right now it's kind of up in the air and there's a lot of gnashing of teeth, trying to figure out how do you address those issues. Some countries like Russia and China, they will often now require that if you're going to collect information on their citizens, that you have to maintain servers in their country. And, you can play the ominous music behind that.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn, for instance, for a long time, you can't access it through Russia because they refused. Whereas Google and Yahoo capitulated and, so you can see those search engines in those countries. And, you have all these different laws being passed. So you're absolutely right. It's being updated all the time. And there's really risk analysis now. To be quite honest, it's almost impossible to comply with every law. If you wanted to. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I think about, like you were mentioning, a blogger. So what are, bloggers tend to put out a lot of personal information. And And I wonder sometimes, can somebody that they're talking about come out and sue them? I would imagine there's laws out there that they can do that. Defamation of character, or he didn't quite say my name, but still, I know, everybody who knows this person knows he's talking about me. You just hear about things like that. How do you protect somebody who's a blogger who's just trying to share information?
Well, defamation, yeah, you're absolutely right. Defamation would be the key element of that. And it just sort of comes down to, the basic elements of defamation. Are you causing harm to somebody's reputation, and is truth a defense? Sometimes you can argue that it's, somebody's expressing an opinion. With most bloggers, what I tell them initially is, well, let's look at what you're doing, see the type of content that you have, and then really you have to explain the risk and say, if you're going to, go about criticizing all of these people, there's a likelihood that you could be sued for defamation. There isn't any way to stop a defamation lawsuit. You can obviously win it at trial. Right. But there's certain risks out there. If you go out there and start ripping people right and left, that's just a risk. If you're, a Breitbart or somebody like that, and you're writing these things that are a little outlandish, that's just part of the business model, and you have to understand that. And if possible, try to insure against it, or take whatever steps are necessary to buffer that. And, sometimes it goes horribly bad. The site just escaped me, but they had the Hulk Hogan trial over his sex tape, and wiped out a site or two who had published the content. And that's, unfortunately, sometimes that's just the way it goes. But that's also a brick and mortar issue. If you were to go out and say something nasty in the newspaper about a competitor or something of that sort, I understand John's a child molester or something of that sort, and it's not true. Well, you're going to get sued, and you're responsible for what you say. With the web, one interesting aspect of there's two interesting aspects. The first is anonymity, as we all know. God forbid you scroll down and read the comments of many sites. People say horrible things. Yeah, a lot of it because they're anonymous. Right. In some countries, they're getting rid of that. So in China, you can no longer be anonymous. If you're providing information on Chinese sites, you have to provide your real information, your real identity. In the U.S., there's still anonymity, but what we're seeing is kind of an erosion of that when it's related to other sites. So there's a law called the Communications Decency Act, and Section 230 of it says that a website cannot be held liable for any kind of claim that's based on the publishing of another person. So worded that poorly, but basically the idea is defamation. So if somebody comes on your site and defames somebody else, the site itself is not liable for that. However, the person can obviously be sued. So where this comes up with is, you think of Yelp reviews, things of this sort. So somebody goes onto Yelp, I go onto Yelp, and I write a horrible review about your podcast, and I say all this stuff that's just completely untrue. In the U.S., you cannot sue Yelp for that. You could sue me, but you're also going to have to get through Yelp to identify me, and it becomes this long slog. Right. And it's very, very difficult. Well, that Section 230 is under attack now, and they're really trying to trim it back. And so the question of anonymity and what value that will have is probably going to change, in the next 5 to 10 years. And anonymity online may become a thing of the past. And as far as people trying to be, semi-civil to each other, that's probably a good thing. But there's also the question of, if anonymity's gone, political issues with that, all kinds of things. Employers looking at what employees are saying, all those types of issues are going to become front and center. So yeah, it's definitely a changing medium and a concern. Yeah.
We talk about a lot about marketing on this show, and, a lot of marketing is telling a story, and a lot of branding is, bringing that personal side to what it is that you do in your business and why you do it. And for a lot of people, they're in their business because of some, hardship in their life, something emotional that they felt broken down by, and they've now built themselves up, or a big problem that they've had that they've been able to solve. And a lot of times that has to do with somebody else in their life. So it could be somebody talking about selling something to do with relationships, and so they're talking about an ex-spouse, or somebody talking about how they felt they were able to build the business after having no confidence because their parents were abusive, and then things like that. For people that want to share their story because it benefits the business and gets people, connected to them and makes them relatable, what are ways that they can protect themselves so that it doesn't come back to haunt them? Or even if it's inevitable that it might, how can they protect themselves?
Right. Well, truth is always a defense to a defamation claim. And again, we're still really talking about defamation. So you have that advantage. Obviously, beforehand lining up the evidence that you would have that it is in fact truthful is something that you would want to do. And that's really the aspect for it. From a financial prospect of paying defense costs and, settlements or judgments, if they should happen, insurance is what you want to look at. Whether they're going to cover defamation or not is something that can be tricky. The problem being that many insurers are going to look at it as, an intentional act, or at least try to make that argument. So you have to be very careful and make sure that you would have coverage for that. Going ahead and forming, a business entity or something of that sort for, your blog or your site or wherever you're building your brand probably isn't going to have, much of a beneficial effect, because the claim against you would be that you are stating this, that you may have this business over here, but, I'll give you an example. So let's say we're in a retail shop, and I have one employee, and we have the world's most annoying customer come in and says horrible things to the employee, and the employee turns around and punches the customer. Okay, well, that's assault. So am I, as the business owner, liable for that? No, the business is liable for it. So the corporation would, or LLC, whatever you have, would protect me personally from being personally liable for that. And because it's an employee that's doing it. Now, if that same customer comes in and I'm the owner and I start talking to them, they annoy me and offend me and I punch them, is the business entity going to protect me? A little bit, but their claim is going to be that I acted as an individual, and punch them, and therefore I should be personally liable. So that's the problem that you run into with websites when you're building a personal brand. If you start saying things that give rise to liability, on a personal level, certainly an argument can be made that you should be held personally liable for it. So it really comes down to risk analysis and sitting down, seeing if you can account for it financially, see if you have evidence in place to try to rebut any defamation claims. And try and address, those types of issues
right
beforehand. And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to rethink the strategy, and sometimes you do. The other element of that is how comfortable are you with risk? I have some clients, they're very comfortable with risk, and it's just part of doing business. I have other clients who, they don't want any risk. And so we do everything possible to mitigate it and bypass, certain monetization strategies and things of that sort that they just don't want anything to do with.
Right. So if somebody came to you with, any kind of online startup idea, maybe it's an app, maybe it's, this is the type of things we want to sell on our site, whatever it is. Do you go through that and talk about, like, in a consultation? Is that what happens? And you come up with, here are the possible risks that could happen, and then here are the ways that you can, whether it's insurance or whatever it is, to protect yourself as best you can?
Typically, yes. Typically, it depends on when they come to me. The first thing we actually discuss usually is the ownership structure, who's involved in the project.
Yeah.
Things of that sort. The biggest concern, and for a lot of people who've started businesses before, they probably are unfortunately familiar with this, is you have the zombie partner. If there's no documentation in place, such as an operating agreement for an
right.
LLC, you can get down the line and one of the founders stops working, or, develops a drug habit or does whatever, and becomes useless. And if you don't have an agreement in place, you can go into court and bring a lawsuit to try to remove that person. It's incredibly expensive. And you end up with a judge who knows very little about your business, making decisions that are going to have a massive effect
right.
On the viability of the business. So most people don't want to do that. And so you end up with a partner that, the other owners just kind of ignore, and they send them a check and, hope nothing, goes too bad with that. So trying to plan for that up front is kind of something that we first look at. And then the second thing would be, what are the risks that are obvious to the startup idea? Personally, I actually like to see it farther down the line. A lot of people have all kinds of ideas about starting a business, and then when they get into the actual nuts and bolts of building the app or building the site or whatever it is, they start making different decisions. And so I'd rather kind of see it farther down the line when it's closer to actually being a real entity,
right?
A real property. And then at that point, though, yeah, absolutely, we take a look at the risk, figure out, where the biggest problem areas are, and then try and plan for it.
Do you ever work with people that they have a startup? They might be so far along. They're still kind of, maybe it's developing technology, and they're, still early in the stages of developing it, and they want to bring on, they want to do capital raise, and they want to give out equity. Do you help with structuring that?
I actually outsource that.
The
reason being is SEC laws. Once you get into securities issues, securities are the ownership position in the businesses.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of intricate rules that go into how that can happen and not happen. Quite frankly, a lot of people violate the rules. But I actually outsource it to somebody who specializes in that, just because that's an area where you want to stay on top of the court developments, recent decisions coming down that are going to change things. So, for instance, crowdfunding, and a lot of these issues, they're brand new in the securities industry. And so there are all kinds of questions about, what's legal, what's not legal. And frankly, most of them haven't been answered. And so as these new decisions come down from the courts, it takes the courts 3 to 5 years after something has happened for them to start issuing decisions. Because what happens is you have a dispute. The dispute goes to trial. The trial results in a verdict one way or the other. Then the parties have to decide if they want to go through the expense of appealing. And if it's a new area of law, they often will. So they appeal. The appeal takes another 1.5 or 2 years, to get up and get heard, and then a decision to be issued. And sometimes they issue a written decision, which becomes binding law for that jurisdiction. So it may be a state or a federal district. And sometimes they don't issue a published decision. They'll just do a private decision, and the private decision doesn't have any effect, which causes the attorneys to grind their teeth, because then it doesn't tell you what the law is going to be and how the courts are going to interpret it. So you have to go through this whole process. And so it takes some time. So in areas such as securities, you really want to go with somebody who specializes in those areas, because you can really trip it up. And if you do, the lawsuits are massive.
Yeah.
So specialization in securities and funding is definitely an area that I recommend.
One thing that we've noticed with our business, with the Draw Shop, is there's a lot of, with startup businesses or smaller businesses, it's really not much of an issue. But when we're working with bigger corporations, there's sometimes, a 3-month wait before you can actually do business with them, because they want to see that you have different kinds of, insurance in place. They have to go through procurement. They have to go through all these different legal things, and really we're just, kind of an agency that makes videos. But it's interesting. What's some advice that you have for people that are providing a service? They still are an online business because they're attracting their customers online. So they're kind of that blend of brick and mortar, but also online. What is your advice to make sure that they've got everything in place so that when something like this happens, they've got everything lined up?
Right. Well, you're going to run into two issues, and you've certainly mentioned one, which is particularly the larger the client that you're dealing with, the more they're going to have a legal department, or they're going to have an outside attorney who's looking to protect them, and they're going to have all kinds of requirements, as you mentioned, the insurance. What they're typically looking for is a certificate from your insurer to indemnify and defend them. Should you do anything that gives rise to liability. I'm actually dealing with this right now with another client. What that basically means is if you think of contracts, you think of the boilerplate that nobody reads except for attorneys, there's usually a clause in there, the indemnity provision. And what indemnity is it basically says, okay, if we get sued because of something that you produced in your service, so let's say you make a video and somebody sues your client saying, hey, that video violates our copyright, regardless of the merits of it, because of the contract, your agency would be responsible for paying for the defense fees of the client, as well as any judgment or settlement.
Right.
Obviously, you don't have that money,
right.
And so most don't. And so the way you deal with that is insurance. So then that large company is going to want to see a certificate from the insurance company saying, yes, we will cover this. And so you go through those steps. Dealing with larger clients is annoying. I'll be completely honest with you. And it is for attorneys too, to go through 85 different meetings to get to somebody who can make a decision. But, if you're going to deal with clients in that sort, particularly from a service perspective, you need to understand that, okay, once you get your proposal out there and they're interested, and you want to get that contract out there immediately and start looking at it. The larger the client, the more they're going to force a contract on you. And you need to understand, that when they do that, that contract is written tilting the business environment in their favor. And so you want to look at those clauses and make sure you're not agreeing to something that, frankly, you can't come through with. And you will see that a lot. For smaller clients, being as old as I am, I still like written contracts.
Yeah.
But you can do, terms and conditions on your site. If you do terms and conditions, the key is to make sure that they're compliant with, the relevant internet legal standards. The days of just using a generator or, copying them from another site are long gone, because services and sites have become unique. A dating site is much different than social media site, which is much different than, a publishing site or something of that sort. So you want to have custom terms, and you can really limit the risk to those terms.
Well, I can imagine the risks with dating sites.
Right. Well, an interesting thing that happened was, we have these debates about the United States Supreme Court, and they're always over hot button topics like abortion, and rightly so. But one of the big issues with the Supreme Court is, do we have a conservative majority of justices or a liberal majority? Liberal majority tends to give more rights to individuals, and conservative justices tend to be more business friendly. So in 2011, they issued a decision in a case called AT&T Mobility versus Concepcion. And in that case, what they said was businesses, for the first time in perhaps 100 years, could include arbitration clauses in their agreements with consumers and with other businesses, and they could force those people into arbitration instead of going to trial.
Oh.
This is a huge decision. Yes, it's a major decision. And just so listeners understand, in trial, you have a jury of your peers. And, that's great. One of the problems with peers is they tend to have an emotional reaction to situations. So one of the famous cases was the hot coffee McDonald's case.
Yes.
So that case was actually not as bad as most people think. McDonald's did, heat the coffee up massively. It was literally burning hot, and the woman received burns. But the jury awarded her $3 million, I think, in damages, which is a wee bit excessive. But it was an emotional response, and you can understand why.
Right.
In an arbitration, there is no jury. Instead, you're presenting your case to either a retired judge or an attorney who's familiar with the field. And so emotional arguments tend to get rejected, and you tend to get a smaller judgment if you are liable, and they also tend to be more business friendly. So you can make a technical legal argument based on, for instance, the boilerplate in your terms and conditions of your website. And whereas, a jury is, half the jury is fallen asleep after 5 minutes of that presentation, a retired judge or an attorney will not, and they'll understand, the elements of that argument a bit better. So you have a much better chance of prevailing. The secondary part of that Supreme Court decision was that they also allow you to now force consumers and businesses to waive their class action rights. So this is particularly important for the internet. So if you think about when you use the internet and you purchase something, how much do you pay? Typically, you're going to buy something for, certainly, let's say, under $100 or $500 each individual transaction. Whatever you do, you might buy clothes or something of that sort. But you're not buying products for 30 grand or something of that sort. So if you have a problem with that product or that service or something of that sort, let's exclude services, but let's just focus on products. So if you have a problem with that product, let's say you pay $600 for it, are you going to go file a lawsuit over that? Probably not. It doesn't make a lot of financial sense. Maybe you go small claims court, maybe you don't. Typically, you're going to complain, you're going to write a nasty review somewhere, go to your credit card company, try and get a chargeback, something of that sort.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the beauty of the internet. You already have some insulation there. One area where that blows up, though, is a class action lawsuit. So a class action lawsuit is typically 5,000 or more people that have the same complaint about a product or service. So if I put a toaster out and the toaster is defective, and every time people touch it to, push the toast down, it shocks you. And I sell 1 million of these toasters. Well, in a class action lawsuit, 500,000 people or whatever get together and sue me. Now they can hire a law firm because it's the cumulative damages that are involved.
Right.
So instead of it being $40, per individual, now you're looking at a much larger number because it's a group. So in the AT&T Mobility case that the Supreme Court decided, they said that you can also force people to waive their class action rights. And so in your terms and conditions, you can include a clause where they're forced to do that. And if you do that, what happens is you're put back into the position where, instead of people bringing this one large lawsuit against you, now they have to bring the little $40 claims for their toaster. The vast majority of them are never going to do that.
Right.
And so you've mitigated.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why if you use Apple products, for instance, you log on to iTunes or whatever it is, and they're always requiring you to read and agree to their terms.
Right.
It's because they're updating those documents all the time to reflect recent court decisions.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right.
Well, so let's talk social media, because there's people either who do it for their clients, that they're building platforms for them, or people are doing it for themselves, or they're hiring somebody to do it. So what are the risks in, because, there's people that are like, we can get you 60,000 likes in 2 days, things like that. What are the risks in building your platforms on social media?
So, there are a number of different risks. I mean, obviously defamation, you need to be careful what you're saying.
Right.
One of the biggest risks probably to start with that most people don't really think about is control. So social media obviously plays an important role. And should you go out and try and build up followings and go viral and all these different things? Absolutely, 100%. Nothing I'm going to say after this counters that. However, you need to think through the process. Social media platforms, you have no ownership. You don't own anything on that site. The content that you submit, you do own, but it's not really valuable in the sense that you would ever use it again or something of that sort. But what's really important to understand is you don't own your followers. So you cannot take your followers based on the terms and conditions of most of these sites. You cannot transfer your followers to your site. So you can't take a list of your followers and create, a newsletter list on your site and just input all those people. That's violating those terms. So while you're building this social, following, and hopefully it's huge and it's going great and everything else, you should always be trying to create promotions and things of that sort that will get a percentage of those people to move over to your site or to a medium that you control, so that you can go ahead and actually have them on a list that you can always mail to. I mean, the email list, a lot of people laugh at them, but they're still valuable.
Yeah.
But if you can get people on an email list, so let's say that you have, let's do easy math. You have 200,000 followers across your social media accounts, and you do all these promotions, give away a free book or a free coaching session, whatever it is. If you go over here and you join my, email list, and let's say 100,000 people go join your email list. Okay. Well, one day, you get a complaint from somebody, or Instagram, let's say your big followings on Instagram gets a complaint that one of your photos is violating, a brand's copyright or something of that sort. And Instagram reacts by closing your account, which they can do.
Right.
You have no recourse. You have none. Okay. You just lost those 200,000 followers, or, whatever it was, but you still have your email list. You can still hit that email list. So it's important to always try to, keep that in mind and try to have some kind of a shift there, so that if the worst happens, that you're going to be in good shape, or at least solid shape. You're not going to be completely wiped out. Now, the reason this is important is most people are probably thinking, well, I would never go out and violate somebody else's copyright. And that's great, but that's not the way the law works. So the key law is the DMCA. It's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It was enacted in 1998. It's a federal law in the U.S. And the idea behind the law was to try to create an environment where sites could grow. If you think back to 1998, there was no Facebook. There was, most of the commercial sites were tiny.
Yeah.
I think Google was still called Backrub. So they gave these sites immunity. And in exchange for immunity, they have to follow a compliance process. Part of that process is that they have to designate a DMCA agent, and they have to put that person up on their site. And when somebody has a copyright complaint, they submit it to that DMCA agent. And that agent then, and this is key, they automatically have to take down the content.
Oh.
There's no judgment. People get angry at Facebook and YouTube. Why'd you take down my stuff? There's no judgment. The law requires them to automatically do it. Now, some companies do try to make a decision on it just because they have so much money, they don't really care if they get sued.
Right.
But that's the way it's supposed to work. Another aspect of that law is that if a particular person using that site gets more than X number of complaints in a particular period of time, say 3 complaints in 2 years, that account has to be terminated.
Oh.
Yes, it's called the repeat infringer policy. And if it is not terminated, then that company becomes jointly liable for all the copyright infringement.
Now, does it have to be Does it have to be a valid complaint? Or can
it does.
Yeah.
It
okay.
does. But
So I was going to say, I could see people just, getting upset with each other. I'm going to do 3 complaints from different accounts, or I don't know. People get crazy.
Oh, they do. No,
Yeah.
they do. It's a business model for some people.
Yeah.
But the thing to understand is that, yes, it has to be a valid complaint. But remember, so when that complaint comes in, the site is supposed to automatically take it down, site or the internet connected app, whatever it is, it's supposed to automatically take it down. At that point, they then send an email to the person who has the account saying, hey, we received a copyright infringement notice from you or from somebody else for your account for this image. We've taken it down. Now, at this point, you can either file a counter notice with us, presenting a legal basis as to why it's not copyright infringement. And at that point, if you do that, we will then send a notice to the copyright owner and tell them that they need to either move forward with a federal copyright infringement lawsuit against you that's going to cost you $100,000 in attorney's fees to defend, or we can leave the content down.
Yeah.
And most people are going to say, leave the content down. Well,
exactly.
That's a successful and valid complaint.
Interesting. I'm learning so much.
Right.
It's crazy.
It's one of those things, you just have to be a little careful about. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot. And what we've seen is the bigger companies, the YouTubes and Instagrams of the world, they now do look at the quality of, the validity of the complaint,
right.
Because it was becoming a problem. But I can tell you, I get a call at least once a month from somebody who's, I had my Tumblr account for 6 years and they just closed me. And that's the reason.
Yeah.
And there's no recourse. There's it. And people say, what about my rights? You have no rights on social media. It's not your business.
Well, and I know there's a lot of, there's people that have their business is all about writing reviews for different companies and then earning affiliate fees on those on those whoever purchases through their affiliate link. And I think, and I know that's something that's been changing a lot too, where you probably have to constantly update and I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's your terms of service or what it is that you put at the bottom of your page, letting people know that this is what you are doing. Is that correct?
Yes, it depends on, exactly what you're doing. So let's say you have a blog and you write a review and you have affiliate links in it. What the FTC wants to see is you put a note next to those links indicating that, hey, I get paid if you click through and buy.
Right.
We've all been to the review sites where there's, 500 treadmills reviewed and all of them are 5 stars and they all link to Amazon, and
exactly.
And it's a joke.
Right.
It's a joke.
Exactly.
Well, the problem with the FTC is they're supposed to look at what a reasonable person, would interpret from a particular situation, but they don't. They basically look at it from, okay, let's assume this person can barely breathe on their own and read. Do they need a disclosure? So they're, in my opinion, they go completely overboard. But in a perfect world, if the FTC has its way, every affiliate link on your site, every single one, even if you have multiple links in the same article, each one is going to have that disclosure.
Right.
And so, that's kind of the standard. And penalties are up to $40,000 per violation.
Right.
So it's, it's significant. You're going to have legal fees defending it and things of that sort. How many sites are complying perfectly with all of those requirements? Pretty small number.
Yeah. It's just crazy how the world has evolved if you thought about what they were doing and what they were monitoring, 20 years ago. And what it is today. It's just crazy. I mean, and even when the internet first came out and people had a legitimate blog on Blogster, whatever it was, the Blogspot, people or these little forums where people were actually honestly writing a review on something like, well, here's the stroller I would buy, or here's the diet product I like, or whatever it is. And it was actual real opinions. And then, it became, wow, we can actually make money off of these opinions.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The internet is, everybody talks about it being a disruptor environment. It really is. And it's created such a different, paradigm for people, to move forward and make money in ways that most of us could never imagine. I mean, the social, media influencer, in the brick and mortar world, that was typically celebrities.
Yeah.
Actors and people of that sort were the only people that could do that. And now, whether it's the health industry or, some other area, you see people coming up on Instagram, that have huge followings or on YouTube and what have you.
Yeah.
And so the FTC is trying to, balance the field. And I understand what they're trying to do. It's just, they never run a business. And so, they want all these hashtags included in tweets and things of that sort. And it's like, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit much.
And the more and more people find loopholes, the more and more they start to come up with more laws.
Right. And it becomes a question of, at what point, it's like the warning on your mattress. Everybody knows there's a warning on your mattress. I can guarantee you probably nobody can read it. And it has, nobody can tell you what it says, and it has no effect. If the whole purpose was to warn you against, some horrible thing you could do with your I'm a lawyer. I don't even know what it says. So what practical effect is it having? And that's why people, become unhappy with the law, and in my opinion, rightly so, is instead of maybe some common sense approaches to situations, we always try to pass laws on these things. And it's just, I give you an example of just how stupid it can be. Revenge porn. I think everybody can agree. Revenge porn is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Revenge porn, just to be clear, is you date somebody, you have intimate pictures of them, you break up, you're pissed off, and you go out and publish those photos of them to embarrass them and what have you. In California, where I am, the legislature tends to get righteous about these things. They enacted a law criminalizing revenge porn. Right? You're in jail, something of that sort. The only problem was they were so clueless about what revenge porn actually was that when they enacted the law, they excluded selfies.
Oh.
Well, selfies make up 95% of all revenge porn, because it's photos you're taking with your partner, and it was pointed out to them, and they were just and so it took them another year before they could amend the law to reflect hey, here's how it works.
Right. Now,
should there be penalties for revenge porn? Of course, it's probably not the best example, but there's so many areas where they issue regulations that it's just madness, and it really just becomes kind of a joke. So unfortunately, the web isn't really escaping that. We're kind of seeing, as I said, the evil empire strike back now with a lot of these rules and regulations. And the FTC is certainly leading that charge.
Crazy stuff. I feel like I have like a billion questions, because there's so many different types of businesses online. And I imagine with each one, there's their own set of risks, obviously. And you've worked things.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could just mention something, I think it might
please.
Help. So these kinds of interviews with lawyers, they tend to be a little scary, particularly if you've never heard of any of these things, if you're a listener. And so the purpose of this isn't to scare you. The purpose of this is to just let you know that there are issues out there. And so, what would be best in your particular situation is, go on Google, do a search for internet lawyer, and they should return results for your area. Run those results through Yelp or something of that sort, so you can see what other people have to say, and you can pick out people, a couple of people who look like they're competent. Most of them are going to give you a free consultation. Just go see the lawyer, show them what you're doing. And then the lawyer will say, well, you have these different issues, or maybe you have no issues. And people call me all the time, they have no issues. But here are issues you need to be concerned about. And then you prioritize them. And it's just like any other to-do list for your business. Where, if there's a major problem or major risk, deal with that right now, and just work your way through it. The purpose of this isn't to suggest that people shouldn't start online businesses. Absolutely, you should. You should never let the law stop it, unless you're doing something, that's blatantly illegal. So that's really the approach. So I hope nobody takes this and gets, concerned and says, closing all my sites and moving to Antarctica. Just go take that step. And then, you'll understand where you are. And if there are things you need to address, obviously you want to find out about those things before you get sued, or before the government shows up. And then, if there aren't things to address, there'll probably be little things at least. And you can have, kind of a priority list there and deal with them, as the budget allows and what have you. And you just go through them. It's just like dealing with accounting. I'm an attorney. I hate accounting. I hate doing bookkeeping and things of that sort. But it's just part of the business, and you do it and off you go. So that would be the better approach with the legal issues that might affect your site. But the important thing is just to understand, a little bit of planning, even just a little bit of planning, can really save you, because a lot of your competitors probably have no planning.
Right.
And so if a government agent or a lawyer is looking at your site compared to one of your competitors, and your site looks to have some compliance, or to certainly be moving in that direction, your competitor has nothing, who are they going to go after?
Right. Well, and that's the wonderful thing about having, someone like you, and especially like you. I've seen your testimonials. I know you work with incredible people like Pat Flynn with Smart Passive Income, and all of these people that you've worked with have been with you for a long time, which is so, says a lot about you, because they know that you're there for them. You're fast, you're quick, and you're knowledgeable, and that's really what you need, because most of us entrepreneurs, we are not experts in this area, and so we rely on that corner man to help keep us protected as best we can. So that's awesome. I don't even know if you take on new clients or anything like that, but I still would love. You have so much valuable information with your site and everything. I'd love to send people to learn more information.
Sure. You can always get me at SoCalInternetLawyer.com, SoCal like Southern California, or you can look me up by my last name, Chapo, Chapo. It's also, unfortunately, a moniker used by a large drug lord in Mexico, now in jail. So if you do a search and you see all these FBI and DEA agents, that's not me. But if you be Richard Chapo, I should pop them. Yeah, I wish it was, had that kind of money, but without the risk. That's a whole different business environment.
Yeah, totally different business.
Well, you got arrested, so I'm hoping a lot of those listings will eventually fade away. But but no, I'd be happy to talk to anybody now for free consults. So just contact me. I'll be happy to help you out.
Wow, fantastic. I love it. Well, thank you so much. This is so cool. And please take advantage of that. SoCalInternetLawyer.com. And Richard, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Sure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to today's Get Genius. You can learn more about The Draw Shop at www.thedrawshop.com on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Your home for kick-butt custom whiteboard marketing videos. Your ideas come to life. Thanks for listening. Please share, comment, and make any suggestions for future genius guests.